But take a look at this one from 2018. It's the leaders of America's closest allies, all looking in one direction, and President Trump looking in another. It's just a photo, but it speaks to one of the biggest questions in the world right now. Almost 70 years ago, the US built a network of alliances that helped make it the most powerful country on Earth. But today, the future of those alliances is in doubt, and they were in trouble even before Donald Trump took office. Now the world is watching a US election that could determine what the future looks like. So how did we get here? What is Trump's vision for America's role in the world? And what's the alternative? In the beginning, the US had just one alliance with France during the Revolutionary War against Great Britain. But after the US won the war, it backed out. And that's because back then, allying with another country usually served one purpose.
Alliances were primarily used to fight and win specific wars.
The US was already protected by two giant oceans, so for the next 150 years, America was alone. Until 1941.
The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked.
When Japan attacked a US naval base, it shattered.
I'm sorry, it's killing me, and I know somebody's going to bring it up when I upload this on YouTube, but you could have brought it up now. That whole presented by Absolute Vodka is killing me.
The idea that oceans could protect the US any longer. So they formed an alliance with these countries and declared war on Japan and its allies. Together they won the war, but faced a very different world in the aftermath. After World War II, there were only two major powers, the US and the Soviet Union. European countries were weak, and some worried the Soviets might invade them and spread communism.
All right, so we're going to get into this big speech about how communism is an effect of, like, the world and how easy it was for us to really dive into United States history and how we kept pushing the idea of the propaganda of the United States is a capitalist society and we would never let communism ever take hold in here. But then we adopted socialism and communism are two different things. If you don't know this, I'm not going to sit here and explain it to you because at this point, come on, like 9th through 12th grade, you should have at least had one run-in with this. But we have this very anti-socialist propaganda, this very anti-communist propaganda, and the reason for that, and I'm going to give you the big, obvious reason and then the subtle, nuanced reason. So you have this whole idea of socialism or communism being this great evil that has killed nations, killed people, etc. non grata. The big overlaying reason why we don't want these systems of government or these systems of economic prosperity to ever exist in our nation is quite simply because if people realized in such a big nation that they had the rights to own the means of production for themselves, what would end up happening here is you would have a revolution on your hands. Because you end up noticing that the exploitation of slavery, Jim Crow, our legacy as Americans have been directly influenced by other countries in the way that we view other human beings that are not white. I'm sorry if you're white and you're just viewing this and it sucks for you to hear it. Big whoop. But at the same time, what ends up happening here is this legacy of white supremacy gets held up on top of us because we refuse at any other point in time to say to ourselves, if we can make a big country like ours work for everybody, then perhaps we would be better off, or perhaps we wouldn't be better off pushing democracy inside of other countries. So what we did was we pushed democracy in countries that were unstable, and we left countries that were perfectly stable on their own. Those ended up falling into the realms of social democracy. You can spend a lot of time Googling literally social democracy and how that works for the greater good of people while not alienating capitalism as a whole as the great driver of economic wealth. If you do that, however, what you end up with is this underlying reason why the United States refuses to push or why they slammed so hard and so down on communism in other countries. When you have a country of 330 to 360 million people, if you tell them all you deserve a piece of the pie, you end up with this great big realization that you've been exploiting us this long. If you keep pushing that any other form of government or economic stability is wrong, then you end up with a great big drive of people who think that if they work hard enough, they deserve what they get. And at this time, I must remind you all, if you're new to the stream and you're trying to figure out what's going on here, my name is The Paradigm Shift. My name is Marquise, and honesty. But The Paradigm Shift aims to try to make politics, life issues, and sometimes poetry and gaming a little bit more palatable for those who are new here. If you're new here and you don't know what to do because there's no Twitch Prime subscription or a Tier 1 subscription, all you have to do is hit the follow button. When that meter hits... Oh, I hit my television. Oh, God. If you're new here, thank you for the follow. That's exactly what we're looking for. We appreciate you, Don Too True. I like that name. It's a very good one. If you're new to the stream and you're trying to figure out what's going on here, I try to make politics and life issues. I try to make politics and life issues a little bit easier for you to absorb and understand. I like the chat to be active. I like different opinions. I generally don't believe that I'm right at everything, but I've studied a long time at this for me to be able to understand what I'm talking about. So if you don't know what to do, follow in Don True's footsteps and hit the follow button. It helps out a lot. It proves to my father that I'm actually not a waste of space and that I'm doing something good with my life. But at the same time, it also helps me to know that people out there are understanding the vision. I am not by any means a communist, a socialist. I'm a capitalist at heart. But I understand that there's exploitation of our people, and I want to at least create an environment where our people, and when I say our people, I mean generally marginalized groups, are not hitting brick walls every time they try to venture out into something forward. So I try to make everything that we discuss here palatable by speaking about it in non-political science terms. I like memes. I like the whole game. I like doing what I do. But at the same time, I feel like there needs to be a voice that says, hey, that's dumb. Why the fuck are you saying some dumb shit like that? So, yeah, that's why the United States refuses to push any other or shove all of the ideals that we sit on and sit down on about any other country as bad. Because they realize that it's exploitation of the workers without a revolution. That's why they hit so hard on unions. That's why they hit so hard on wage worker revolutions. That's why we had the Industrial Revolution. That's why we had people like Rosie the Riveter. That's why we had these big union strikes like this. Because they know that there's power. They know that there's power in what? They know that there's power in, oh God, we have, ladies and gentlemen, we finally hit it. We have our first bot. We have our first bot on the stream. So you know what I'm going to do for you, my beautiful bot? I'm going to hit you with that beautiful timeout. Hopefully you never come back. Anyway. Yeah, so that's why the United States refuses to like hold true on anything like that we speak about when it comes to other countries. I remember, what was it? Bernie Sanders got real flack for this, but then Obama got the flack for it at the beginning, where we were talking about how Cuba's population was well literate. Anything that you would do to a society to push it further, even if it's at the detriment of your own leadership, your own power, that's looked at as bad. That's why we don't have great education standards, and that's why a lot of teachers are left to fend for themselves when it comes to funding certain activities or certain things, because they know that if we had a well-educated populace, they would be like, where's our UBI? First of all, it's been like 8 months. Joe Biden, if you end up in the stream one day, hey man, I could use a stimmy. Like, think about it. Other countries got $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 a month. We got $1,200 for. We got $1,200. We got $1,200 for. We got $1,200 for 8 months. And you know what they gave us in response? This was their response to us when we said, hey, we could probably use more than $1,200 for 8 months.
What are you doing?
Yeah.
I got something to do today, man. What are you doing?
I got something to do for you. Survive.
I can't breathe.
Literally their fucking response to us, like, was survive. What the fuck? What the fuck, man? What the absolute fuck were we supposed to do with that $1,200? Some people's rents were $1,600. They were like, thank God we got that stimmy. And then it went immediately away.
To protect against that, the US formed a collective alliance with 11 other countries, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO. The agreement was simple. An armed attack on one member would be regarded as an attack on all, requiring every member to come to its assistance. But the reality was more complicated. The US had a massive military, while these countries had weak ones, if any at all. That meant NATO was really a guarantee by the US to protect all these countries from attacks. It was risky, but it gave the US leverage over countries that now depended on them for protection. It used that leverage to align those countries with its own foreign policy, and many allowed the US to build military bases inside their borders, giving the US a first line of defense against the Soviets. The US also saw threats elsewhere. In 1948, North Korea had become a communist country, and in 1949, so did China. So the US signed individual alliances with 6 more countries. The US also signed a collective alliance with 21 countries in Latin America. By 1960, the Soviet Union was surrounded by countries that, if they attacked, would trigger war with the US. For hundreds of years, alliances had been used to fight and win specific wars. This was something new.
The real gamble that the United States was taking was the idea that it would use alliances to keep wars from starting at all.
One of the first tests of this idea came.
And then we did the dumb shit where we started instigating in different countries because democracy. Oh man, I swear to God, guys, I'm so sorry I don't have one. I'm so sorry I don't have one, but if this was the time for like the big eagle like emote to come over my page and like America, fuck yeah, like that would be the time where I would play that. Like, yo, we did this to ourselves. So in the strength of it all, we created all these alliances, and then we were like, look, these are the nations that won't fuck with us because we protect them. So let's go push democracy in other places. Even though we know that we weren't pushing democracy, but we were looking for resources.
In Berlin. The city lay deep in Soviet-controlled East Germany, but was divided between the NATO countries and the Soviets. In 1961, the Soviet leader told Western powers to leave. Instead, the US and its allies quickly moved troops into Berlin, and the US publicly committed to uphold its promise.
The United States is there. The United Kingdom and France are there. The pledge of NATO is there.
In response, the Soviets built a wall through the city and backed down. The US guarantee also helped prevent further wars in Taiwan and Korea. It proved that this system worked, but only if America's enemies and allies actually trusted that the US would follow through. So for the next 60 years, US presidents said it out loud.
A nation cannot remain great if it betrays its allies and lets down its friends.
Our ties with Japan and our European allies are stronger than ever.
We will strengthen our historic ties and assure them of our support and firm commitment.
And it worked. The Soviets believed it. World War III never happened, and the US won the Cold War.
History.
Sometimes when I hear about we won the Cold War, I literally think like, we won the Cold War, but did we win the technological war? Like, did we win the whole idea that we are all united? Because we still push that other countries are bad. And nothing like made it more clear than when Donald Trump started like echoing his praise for literal authoritarian dictatorships and left other allies out to dry because they were, oh, they're weak. They need us. Like,
Is unfolding in the Soviet Union.
Last one out of the Soviet Union, please turn out the lights.
The United States recognizes and welcomes the emergence of a free, independent, and democratic Russia.
Between 1989 and 1991, the Soviet Union and its communist allies in Europe fell apart. Now the US was the world's only superpower, and most of its allies were safe from invasion. But for NATO, that created an existential question.
Should the alliance go out of business because its primary adversary had disassembled itself, or should it find a new case for its being?
European leaders and many American leaders supported keeping NATO around to support democracy and security in Europe.
Ultimately, the best strategy to ensure our security and to build a durable peace is to support the advance of democracy elsewhere.
It would be a catastrophe for American interest if instability were to alter the current situation in Europe.
We want the peace to last.
In 1999, NATO added 3 former Soviet allies, Poland, the Czech Republic, and Hungary. And NATO started intervening in conflicts outside of its membership. In 1999, it bombed Serbian forces fighting in Kosovo. NATO also helped the US invade Afghanistan after the 9/11 attacks in 2001 and supported parts of the war in Iraq in 2003. Meanwhile, in Asia, the US had stayed close with South Korea and Japan to counter North Korea. But the fall of the Soviet Union had made the alliances with these countries harder to justify.
And those relationships in a lot of ways went adrift. And that all created something of a soft strategic underbelly in Southeast Asia.
Some US leaders began to question the cost of those alliances. The US had asked NATO allies to spend 2% of their GDP on defense, but few countries were meeting that goal. So they urged NATO, along with South Korea and Japan, to increase their spending, while still reaffirming its promise to back its allies.
Their cause is America's cause.
We will defend our allies and our interests.
America will always act, alone if necessary, to protect our people and our allies.
Still, these alliances were drifting, and 2 countries were starting to test their weak points.
Russian planes again bombing Georgian targets this morning.
In 2004, NATO had added 7 more members, including these 3 known as the Baltic states. Leaders in Russia became concerned that NATO had reached its borders, and after NATO made plans to add Georgia and Ukraine, it decided to act. Russia invaded Georgia in 2008, then Ukraine in 2014, preventing either country from joining NATO. But those invasions also...
So, I know it wasn't covered very heavily in the news. Well, it was. That's a lie. But we were also dealing with the financial crisis of... we were dealing with the 2007-2008 financial crisis, to which I always say, please do me a favor and go watch The Big Short if you don't know what was going on during then. But this has never stopped. I don't want you to think about the world of invasions and the world of like 1930s, 1940s, even the 1800s as a world that like, oh, we reach peace and like countries don't invade one another now and then. This is still happening. And in retrospect to the normal American, this won't matter because it's off soil. But we don't have a great taste in the East. We don't. Because we don't exude the same, which they touched on already, but I'm going to touch on it in a better form. We don't exude the same confidence in our allies as we do now. Because all we do is picture them as places where we can be in more of an influence to push democracy to take resources. I'm sure they're going to touch on that, but I'm going to tell you now. And as always, ladies and gentlemen, it is about 2 hours and 30 minutes into the stream. So if you're new here and you don't know what's going on, I attempt to shift the paradigm in how we think about politics, life issues. I will throw some poetry in there from time to time. And if you're like, oh my God, I'd love to hear you do poetry because your voice is so beautiful and smooth, you can do me a favor and hit that follow button. I think we're almost all of the way there to finally meet the other persona. It will be an 8-hour stream. So it'll be a long one and it'll take a lot of effort for me to actually get this up and doing. So if you don't mind hitting the follow button, it means the world to me. Thank you to Don Too True for actually hitting the follow and probably sticking around. I appreciate all of the people that come through here. You mean the world to me. And as little creators who get bigger and bigger and bigger, they tend to forget their followers. But you guys were the start and you will always be in my heart. I have your names written down here. Here's a list of the last few subscribers who have subscribed to the channel. Followers who have followed the channel. We have Don Two Through. Gonna replay.
Shut the fuck up!
We had a hosting by Acute Punk. We had a beautiful Love Befasta. We had Princess Dallas from New York. Resident Evil. We've got gaming channels following along as well. We had Watch Wolf Go following the channel, and our last subscriber of the week was Modern. If you don't mind, hit the follow button. We're almost to critical function overload, and that means that you're going to meet the alternate ego persona of mine. And if you don't know who the alternate ego persona of mine is, well, I'm sorry to tell you, but that alternate ego persona knows way more than I do, and he's willing to speak to you on my behalf. But in order for him to actually show his face, he has to feel like he's loved. In order for him to feel loved, he's going to need the follows. It literally costs nothing.
Had another purpose.
You can think about Russia's invasion of Ukraine as a prelude to what could happen if Russia decided to make a quick fait accompli grab in the Baltics.
Russia was building up a massive military presence along its border, and now its willingness to invade its neighbors raised an uncomfortable question. Would the US and its allies actually be willing to go to war to defend one of these small countries?
The cup is now empty, by the way.
Over in Asia, China developed a similar strategy. Since the end of the Cold War, China has become the second biggest economy in the world, and it built a military and missile stockpile capable of controlling this whole region.
Both Russia and China have developed military strategies that seek to demonstrate to American allies that the United States can't protect them.
They've also introduced strategies that advance their own regional interests, but in ways that wouldn't trigger a US response. Russia began launching cyber attacks all over Europe and spreading disinformation in support of radical politicians. In the South China Sea,
I wonder if that sounds familiar to anything that we've possibly faced in the last 4 years.
China turned remote reefs into man-made islands with military bases on them, all in an area disputed by many countries. It's also issued huge loans and built infrastructure projects in dozens of countries around the world, giving them not just economic leverage in those places, but political leverage as well.
Russia and China leave the United States and its allies scrambling to respond, and without triggering a treaty commitment that might result in their cooperation to defend their mutual interests.
All of this is designed to force America's allies to doubt its commitment and potentially peel off from each other and the US. But exactly how the US should deal with this was unclear. Then, in 2016, it elected a president who...
Oh God, they're gonna say it. Oh, fuck me. Everything that I've said thus far in this stream is about to go to shit because they're about to bring it up, and I hate that. So, if you're new here, this is about the time that we write the same sentence we write all the time. Don't predict. Just let the video play out and respond. I generally don't do that because it's... See, what I like to say when I talk about things like this is not hard for us to grasp. And I know that when you come on to, Twitch, you come on here, you're not really like thinking about, oh God, world issues. Oh God, how do I deal with this? Oh God. I try to make it more palatable to you. I try to make it more accessible to you because I understand that a lot of what we don't understand, like people say my vote doesn't matter. They're going to pick the winner anyway, or my vote here doesn't matter, or my activism here doesn't matter. You've always had the power to change your state, you've always had the power to change your neighborhood, your city, your state, the country, if not the world. They don't want you to do that because people having power scares them. And I'll always remind you of this. Every leader of the civil rights movement was killed. Whether you think they could have been protected better, whether you think that it was just a freak accident by somebody who hated they had power, whatever you think it was, there was a purpose in why they specifically led them not to, want them alive anymore. You have to realize the power is in you. The power is in you. The more people that speak out, the more that it gets worse, the more that they realize, oh shit, we're losing our grasp. You gotta realize that, and I hate that I have to say that out loud, but they do that. They do that all the time.
Took things in a dramatically new direction.
We've defended other nations' borders, subsidized the armies of other countries. It's going to be only America first.
President Trump's view was that many international agreements were inherently unfair to the U.S., and that the U.S. could get a better deal by negotiating relationships with each individual country. So he pulled the U.S. out of several agreements previously made with allies, and he considered withdrawing from alliances unless allies spent more on defense.
NATO members must finally contribute their fair share and meet their financial obligations.
Trump had a point. In 2016, many allies were still under their spending goals. He demanded that NATO, South Korea, and Japan dramatically increase it or face consequences.
South Korea is costing us $5 billion a year, and they were paying about $500 million for $5 billion worth of protection. And we have to do better than that.
In 2018, he abruptly canceled military exercises with South Korea. And in 2020, he pulled 12,000 troops out of Germany. All this has caused U.S. allies to further doubt the U.S.'s promises. In some cases, it's made them move closer to its adversaries.
Even the United States' closest allies in Asia, like Japan, have increasingly deepened their ties with China. So what we're starting to see is a set of hedging behaviors in case the United States does not return to the status of predictable ally.
And now these countries are watching an election that could decide if the U.S. will continue to pull away from its alliances or come back. Trump's opponent, Joe Biden, was one of the most vocal supporters of the U.S. alliance system as a senator and a vice president.
Working cooperatively with other nations to share our values and goals doesn't make America suckers. It makes us more secure.
And he's running on a platform that would pull America's allies closer.
Who's the first world leader you would reach out to?
I would call a meeting of NATO leadership, and I would make clear that we're back.
But the limitations of these alliances are also the reason the U.S. is in this situation to begin with. But how exactly to update this decades-old system is a daunting question. What's certain is that Russia and China will keep trying to separate America from its allies, and the next president will have a huge amount of power over what to do about it. He'll have to answer something that every American ally is wondering. Who does the U.S. want to be in the world?